The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the conservatory, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Catherine Miller sat at the grand piano, her fingers barely touching the keys as she stared at the sheet music before her. The notes seemed to blur together, meaningless black dots on white paper that held no melody, no life. 6 months had passed since her daughter Charlotte's accident, and Catherine hadn't played a single note. The conservatory had once been filled with music. Charlotte's laughter would echo through the halls as she practiced her scales, her small hands stretching to reach the octaves that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old. Catherine would sit beside her, guiding those tiny fingers, watching with pride as Charlotte's natural talent blossomed into something extraordinary. The piano bench still bore the small scratches from where Charlotte would adjust its height, determined to reach the pedals like her mother. Now the conservatory felt like a mausoleum. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling or the distant hum of traffic from the street below. Catherine's students had stopped coming weeks ago. Word had spread through the small music community that Catherine Miller, once the most sought-after piano instructor in the city, was no longer teaching. No longer playing. No longer living, really, just existing in the shadow of her former self. Dr. Rebecca Hayes knocked softly on the conservatory door before entering. She had been Catherine's friend long before becoming her therapist, and she knew that professional boundaries sometimes needed to bend when grief threatened to consume someone entirely. Rebecca found Catherine exactly where she expected, sitting at the piano with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. "The recital is in 3 weeks," Rebecca said gently, settling into one of the chairs that lined the wall. She didn't mention that it was the annual children's recital that Catherine had organized for the past 15 years. She didn't need to. Catherine's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "I can't. I know it feels impossible right now." But Charlotte loved that recital. She spent months preparing for it last year. The mention of Charlotte's name sent a visible shudder through Catherine. She closed her eyes, and Rebecca could see the battle playing out across her features. Pain, love, guilt, and an overwhelming sense of loss warred for dominance. "She was going to play Chopin," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Minute Waltz." She had been practicing for months, staying up past her bedtime because she was so excited. She wanted to surprise everyone with how much she had improved. Rebecca nodded, remembering Charlotte's excitement when she had called to share the news about her piece selection. The little girl had been so proud, so eager to show off her skills at her first big recital. "The other children are still planning to perform," Rebecca continued carefully. "Some of them were Charlotte's friends. They've been asking about you, wondering if the recital will still happen." Catherine stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the small garden behind the conservatory. The roses Charlotte had helped plant last spring were blooming, their red petals bright against the green foliage. Everything continued to grow and change and live, while Charlotte remained frozen in time, forever 8 years old in Catherine's memory. "I can't even look at her pictures without falling apart," Catherine said, her reflection ghost-like in the window glass. "How am I supposed to sit through hours of children playing piano? How am I supposed to smile and congratulate them when my daughter will never play again?" The accident replayed in Catherine's mind as it did every day, every hour. Charlotte had been walking home from school, her backpack bouncing with each step as she hurried to get to her piano lesson. Catherine had been waiting at the conservatory, warming up the piano, when the call came. A distracted driver, a moment of inattention, and Charlotte's bright future was extinguished in an instant. Rebecca stood and moved to stand beside her friend. "What if this isn't about you having to do anything? What if it's about letting Charlotte's memory live through the music she loved?" Catherine turned away from the window, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Don't you think I've tried? I've sat at this piano every day for 6 months, and I can't make a sound. My fingers won't move. It's like my body knows that playing without her is a betrayal somehow." "Maybe you're not supposed to play alone." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Rebecca had been thinking about this for weeks, watching Catherine waste away in her grief. She had researched extensively, spoken to colleagues, and, finally, found what she believed might be a path forward. "There's a program in the city," Rebecca began slowly. It pairs adults who are struggling with loss with children who need mentorship. Specifically, children who have experienced trauma or lost themselves. Catherine shook her head immediately. I can't be around children right now. It's too painful. What if it's not about replacing Charlotte? What if it's about honoring her memory by helping someone else find the same joy in music that she had? Catherine sank back onto the piano bench, her hands trembling as she touched the keys without pressing them. Tell me about the program. Rebecca pulled out a folder she had been carrying, setting it gently on the piano. It's called Harmony of Hearts. They match bereaved adults with children who have experienced loss or trauma. The idea is that music becomes a bridge between two people who understand pain. Catherine opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photographs and brief biographies of children in the program. Her eyes immediately fell on a photo of a young girl with dark curls and serious brown eyes. The resemblance to Charlotte was striking enough to make Catherine's breath catch. Her name is Sophia Martinez, Rebecca explained, noticing where Catherine's attention had landed. She's 9 years old. Her parents died in a house fire 8 months ago, and she's been living with her grandmother. She used to play piano before the accident, but she stopped after her parents died. Catherine studied Sophia's photograph. The girl's eyes held a weight that no 9-year-old should carry, a depth of understanding about loss that mirrored Catherine's own. She looks so sad. Her grandmother says she sits at their old piano sometimes but never plays. She just stares at the keys like they might hold some answer she can't find. The parallel was impossible to ignore. Catherine looked from Sophia's photo to the piano keys beneath her own hands. Two broken people, connected by loss and an instrument that had once brought them both joy. What would I be expected to do? Catherine asked, though part of her already knew she was going to say yes. Start slowly. Maybe just sit together at first. Talk about music, about loss, about anything that feels comfortable. The program doesn't have a timeline or specific goals beyond creating a supportive connection. Catherine closed the folder but kept Sophia's photo visible. Does she know about Charlotte? Rebecca nodded. The program shares relevant information with families. Sophia's grandmother thinks it might help Sophia to work with someone who understands what it's like to lose someone you love. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting the conservatory in a golden glow that reminded Catherine of the evenings she and Charlotte would practice together. Charlotte would always insist on playing one last piece as the sun set, saying the music sounded different in the golden light. When would this start? Catherine asked. Whenever you're ready. But, Catherine, the recital is still 3 weeks away. If you're going to participate, you need to let the other families know soon. Catherine stared at Sophia's photo for a long moment. The girl's eyes seemed to look directly at her, carrying a plea that Catherine recognized in her own reflection. They were both drowning, both desperately need something to hold on to. What if I fail her? What if I'm too broken to help anyone else? Rebecca sat down beside Catherine on the piano bench, something she had done countless times when they were younger, and Catherine was nervous before a performance. What if you don't? What if helping her helps you too? Catherine's hands hovered over the keys, and, for a moment, she almost pressed down. Almost let herself make music again. But, the moment passed, and her hands fell back to her lap. I need to think about it, she said finally. Rebecca nodded, understanding that this was actually progress. 3 weeks ago, Catherine wouldn't have even looked at the folder. Take all the time you need. But, remember, sometimes the only way through grief is to walk alongside someone else who's traveling the same dark path. After Rebecca left, Catherine sat alone in the growing darkness, Sophia's photo still clutched in her hand. The conservatory felt different somehow, less like a tomb and more like a place waiting to come back to life. She thought about Charlotte's excitement for the recital, how she had planned to wear her blue dress and had practiced her bow in the mirror for hours. Maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe this wasn't about betraying Charlotte's memory. Maybe it was about keeping it alive. Catherine finally stood, walking to the window one more time. The garden was barely visible now, just shadows and shapes in the darkness. But she knew the roses were still there, still blooming, still reaching toward the light even in the dark. She looked down at Sophia's photo again, and, for the first time in months, Catherine felt something other than despair. It was small, fragile, barely there at all. But it might have been hope. The next morning would bring difficult decisions and painful conversations. But tonight, for the first time since Charlotte's accident, Catherine went to bed without crying herself to sleep. Instead, she lay awake thinking about a little girl with sad eyes who might understand what it felt like to have music die inside your heart. And, for the first time in 6 months, Catherine began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, music could come back to life too. The coffee shop on Elm Street buzzed with morning activity, but Catherine barely noticed the conversations and clinking of cups around her. She sat in a corner booth, nervously straightening the program brochure for the 100th time. Across from her sat Maria Martinez, Sophia's grandmother, whose weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug like it might provide comfort for more than just the morning chill. Maria was smaller than Catherine had expected, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that held the same sadness that Catherine recognized in her own mirror. But there was something else there too, a strength born from necessity, the kind that comes from having to hold a family together when everything has fallen apart. "Thank you for meeting with me," Catherine said, her voice uncertain. She had called the Harmony of Hearts program coordinator the day after Rebecca's visit, surprising herself with her own words as she heard herself volunteering. "Sophia needs this," Maria replied simply, her slight accent adding warmth to the words. "She sits at the piano every day since we moved her to my house. Never plays, just sits and looks at the keys like they have secrets she can't understand." Catherine nodded, understanding completely. "How long has it been since she stopped playing?" "The day we told her about her parents. 8 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Maria's precision spoke to how carefully she had been counting, marking time by her granddaughter's silence. "Before the fire, Sophia would wake us up in the morning playing. Not practicing, just playing. Making up songs, experimenting with sounds. The piano was like a friend to her." The mention of Sophia's creative relationship with music struck Catherine deeply. Charlotte had been the same way, treating the piano not just as an instrument to be mastered, but as a companion for her emotions. Happy songs on good days, soft melodies when she was sad, dramatic pieces when she felt particularly theatrical. "What happened the night of the fire?" Catherine asked gently, though part of her dreaded hearing another story of sudden, senseless loss. Maria's hands tightened around her mug. "Sophia was staying with me for the weekend. Her parents had been fighting more often, and they thought some time apart would be good for everyone. Sophia was supposed to go home Sunday evening." Maria paused, staring out the window at the people walking past, all of them carrying on with normal lives that hadn't been shattered by tragedy. The fire started around midnight. "Electrical problems," they said. "Old wiring in an old house." By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. Sophia's parents died from smoke inhalation in their sleep. Maria's voice remained steady, but Catherine could see the tremendous effort it took to maintain that composure. "Sophia blames herself. She thinks if she had been there, she could have woken them up. Or maybe if she hadn't been fighting with her mother about piano practice the day before she left, none of this would have happened. Children find ways to make everything their fault, don't they?" Catherine felt a sharp pain in her chest. Charlotte had never had the chance to blame herself for anything. She had been walking home from school, excited about her piano lesson, when a distracted driver changed everything in an instant. But Catherine had found plenty of ways to blame herself. If she had picked Charlotte up from school that day. If she had scheduled the lesson for a different time. If she had never encouraged Charlotte's love of music in the first place. "How is Sophia doing now, living with you?" Catherine asked, steering the conversation away from her own spiraling thoughts. Maria smiled for the first time since they had sat down. "She's a good girl. Quiet, but good. She helps me in the kitchen, does her homework without being asked. But she's like a ghost sometimes, going through the motions of living without really being present." Catherine understood that feeling intimately. "Does she talk about wanting to play piano again?" "Never directly. but sometimes I catch her humming melodies her mother used to sing. And, last week, I found her in her parents' old room, holding one of her mother's sheet music books. When she saw me, she put it back quickly, like she was doing something wrong. The weight of Sophia's complicated grief settled over Catherine. It wasn't just the loss of her parents that the child was carrying, but guilt about surviving, about being away when they died, about the last conversation being an argument. Catherine realized that working with Sophia might force her to confront her own guilt about Charlotte's death. "What are you hoping will come from this partnership?" Catherine asked. "I want to see Sophia smile again. Really smile, not just the polite one she gives adults who ask how she's doing. I want to hear her laugh the way she used to when she would play songs for her parents. Music was how Sophia talked to the world before. Now she barely talks at all." Catherine felt a flutter of panic. What if she couldn't help Sophia find her way back to music? What if her own brokenness made things worse instead of better? "I should tell you that I haven't played piano since my daughter died. I don't know if I can teach anymore." Maria reached across the table and covered Catherine's hand with her own. The gesture was unexpected and surprisingly comforting. Maybe this isn't about teaching. Maybe it's about two people who love music finding their way back to it together. The program coordinator had explained that Catherine and Sophia would meet twice a week for an hour each session. The first meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday afternoon at the conservatory. Catherine had spent the days between Maria's call and the meeting alternating between excitement and terror. Wednesday arrived gray and drizzly, matching Catherine's mood as she prepared the conservatory for Sophia's visit. She had cleaned the piano until it gleamed, arranged the chairs to be less formal, and placed a small vase of flowers from Charlotte's garden on the windowsill. She wanted the space to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. At exactly 3 o'clock, Catherine heard the front door chime. She walked to the entrance to find Sophia and Maria shaking rain from their coats. Sophia was taller than she had appeared in the photograph, with long legs that seemed too big for the rest of her body, the awkward proportions of a child in the middle of a growth spurt. "Hello, Sophia," Catherine said, kneeling down to be at eye level with the girl. "I'm Catherine." Sophia's dark eyes studied Catherine's face with an intensity that was unsettling. It was as if the child was looking for something specific, some sign that would tell her whether this adult could be trusted with whatever remained of her fragile heart. "Grandmother says you had a little girl who died," Sophia said quietly, her directness startling in its simplicity. Catherine felt her breath catch. She had expected to work up to discussing Charlotte, to find gentle ways to share their connection through loss. Sophia's straightforward approach left no room for careful navigation. "Yes," Catherine replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside her. Her name was Charlotte. She was 8 years old. Sophia nodded solemnly, as if this information confirmed something important. "My parents died too. In a fire." "I know. I'm very sorry that happened to you. Grandmother says maybe we can help each other not be so sad all the time." The conversation felt surreal to Catherine. Here was a 9-year-old child discussing death and grief with the matter-of-fact tone that only someone who had been forced to grow up too quickly could manage. Maria squeezed Sophia's shoulder gently. "Why don't I wait in the front room while you and Catherine talk?" Sophia nodded, and Catherine led her into the conservatory. The girl immediately walked to the piano, but instead of sitting at the bench, she stood beside it, running her fingers along the polished wood of the case. "Do you miss playing piano?" Catherine asked, settling into one of the chairs rather than claiming the piano bench. "I miss my mom," Sophia replied, not answering the question directly. "She used to sing when I played. Even when I made mistakes, she would keep singing." Catherine felt tears threaten. "That sounds beautiful." She said music was like a conversation between people who loved each other. "She said when I played and she sang, we were talking in a language only we understood." The description was so similar to how Catherine had thought about playing with Charlotte that it took her breath away. Charlotte had often asked Catherine to play duets with her, not because the music required 2 players, but because she loved the feeling of creating something together. "Would you like to sit at the piano?" Catherine asked gently. Sophia shook her head immediately. I can't. Every time I try to touch the keys, I think about the last time I played for my parents. We had a fight because I didn't want to practice scales. I said piano was stupid and boring, and I stomped away from the piano. That was the last thing I said about music to my mom. Catherine's heart broke for this child carrying such an enormous burden. Sophia, can I tell you something about my last conversation with Charlotte? Sophia nodded, settling into the chair beside Catherine. The morning before she died, Charlotte was rushing to get ready for school, and she couldn't find her favorite hair ribbon. She asked me to help her look, but I was busy preparing for a lesson and told her to find another ribbon. She got upset and said I cared more about teaching other people's children than about her. Catherine paused, remembering the sting of those words, how they had echoed in her mind during the phone call about the accident. I was planning to talk to her about it when she came for her lesson that afternoon. I was going to apologize and explain that I loved her more than anything in the world, including music. But I never got the chance. Sophia was staring at Catherine with wide eyes. Do you think she knows now that you love her? The question was so pure, so hopeful, that Catherine felt something shift inside her chest. I think she does. I think love doesn't stop when someone dies. And I think parents understand that children get frustrated and say things they don't mean. Do you think my parents know I didn't really think piano was stupid? Catherine reached out and took Sophia's small hand in hers. I think they know that you loved music because you loved sharing it with them. And I think they know that being angry about practice is different from not loving something. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing this new perspective on her guilt. Finally, she looked up at Catherine. Can you show me how to sit at the piano again? I forgot how it's supposed to feel. Catherine's heart raced. This was what she had been dreading, the moment when she would have to face the piano as a teacher again, to interact with music in a way that didn't involve Charlotte. But, looking at Sophia's hopeful face, Catherine realized that this wasn't about her fear anymore. This was about helping a child find her way back to something beautiful. Catherine stood and walked to the piano bench, patting the space beside her. Sophia followed, settling onto the bench with the careful movements of someone approaching something precious and fragile. First, we adjust the bench so your arms can rest comfortably, Catherine explained, raising the height slightly. Now, let your hands rest on your knees. Feel how the bench supports you. Sophia followed the instructions, her posture gradually relaxing as she remembered the familiar position. Your parents loved hearing you play, Catherine continued softly. Every time you sit at a piano, you're honoring that love. You're not betraying them by making music again. You're keeping their memory alive. Sophia placed her hands on the keys without pressing them, just feeling the smooth ivory beneath her fingers. Will you play something? I want to remember what music sounds like. Catherine's hands trembled as she raised them to the keyboard. 6 months of silence stretched between her and the music that had once defined her life. But Sophia was watching with such trust, such hope, that Catherine couldn't bear to disappoint her. She pressed down gently on middle C, and the single note rang out clear and true in the quiet conservatory. Sophia's eyes widened as if she had forgotten how beautiful the sound could be. Catherine played a simple melody, nothing complicated, just a gentle tune that seemed to fill the space with warmth. As the notes flowed, she felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of grief beginning to unravel. When the melody ended, Sophia was smiling. It was small, tentative, but unmistakably genuine. That was beautiful, Sophia whispered. Can you teach me to play like that? For the first time since Charlotte's death, Catherine felt a spark of something that might have been joy. Yes, she said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. I think I can. As their first session ended and Maria returned to collect Sophia, Catherine realized that something important had shifted. She wasn't healing Charlotte's absence by working with Sophia. Instead, she was learning that love and music and memory could exist together in new ways, creating something different but still beautiful. The recital was still 2 weeks away, and Catherine still didn't know if she would be able to participate. But, for the first time in months, the silence in the conservatory felt like possibility rather than emptiness. The second week of working with Sophia brought unexpected challenges and small miracles. Sophia had begun to play simple melodies, her fingers remembering patterns that her heart had tried to forget. But progress wasn't linear. Some days she would sit at the piano and cry silently, overwhelmed by memories of her parents. Other days, she would play with a fierce determination that reminded Catherine painfully of Charlotte. On a Thursday afternoon, Sophia arrived at the conservatory clutching a worn notebook to her chest. Catherine had learned to read the girl's moods by the way she carried herself, and today Sophia seemed nervous but excited, a combination that usually meant she had something important to share. "I brought something," Sophia announced as soon as Maria had left them alone. She opened the notebook to reveal pages of handwritten musical notation, the notes drawn in different colored pencils with careful precision. Catherine examined the pages with growing amazement. "Did you write these?" Sophia nodded, suddenly shy. "I used to make up songs for my parents. Mom kept all of them in this book. I found it when grandmother and I were packing up the house." The compositions were remarkably sophisticated for a child Sophia's age. They showed an intuitive understanding of melody and harmony that couldn't be taught, only nurtured. Catherine could see traces of lullabies and folk songs, influences from Sophia's cultural background woven into original melodies. "This one was for my father's birthday," Sophia said, pointing to a piece titled Papa's Morning Coffee Song. The notation was accompanied by small drawings of coffee cups and musical notes dancing around the margins. "He always hummed while he made coffee, but he couldn't carry a tune. So I wrote down what I thought he was trying to sing." Catherine laughed despite herself, charmed by Sophia's creative interpretation of her father's off-key humming. "Would you like to play it?" Sophia's face fell. "I tried at grandmother's piano, but it doesn't sound right anymore." "Nothing sounds right. Sometimes grief changes how we hear music," Catherine said gently. "It's not that the music is wrong. It's that we're hearing it through sadness now. How do we make it sound happy again?" The question cut straight to the heart of what Catherine had been wrestling with for months. How did you find joy in something that had been shared with someone who was gone forever? "I don't know if it will ever sound exactly the same," Catherine admitted. "But maybe it can sound different and still be beautiful. Maybe it can carry both happiness and sadness, and that makes it more true to how we really feel." Sophia considered this, tracing her finger along one of the melodies she had written. "Can we try playing this together? You could play the bottom part while I play the melody." Catherine's heart rate quickened. Playing duets had been something special she had shared only with Charlotte. But, looking at Sophia's hopeful expression, Catherine realized that sharing music with this child wasn't replacing Charlotte. It was expanding the circle of love and music that Charlotte had been part of. They spent the next 30 minutes working through Papa's Morning Coffee Song. Sophia's melody was sweet and playful, punctuated by musical jokes that mimicked the sounds of a coffee grinder and the whistle of a kettle. Catherine improvised a simple accompaniment that supported Sophia's creativity without overwhelming it. When they finished, Sophia was beaming. "It sounds different than when I played it for Papa, but it still sounds like love." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes, it does." As the session ended, Sophia gathered her notebook carefully, but hesitated before closing it. "Catherine? Do you think my parents can still hear music?" The question caught Catherine off guard. She had been asking herself the same thing about Charlotte for months. Could the dead hear the living? Did music transcend the boundary between life and death? "I don't know for sure," Catherine said honestly. "But I think love finds ways to continue, even after death. And I think when we play music with love in our hearts, somehow that love reaches the people who taught us to love music in the first place." Sophia nodded solemnly, accepting this uncertainty with the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to children who had experienced profound loss. After Sophia and Maria left, Catherine sat alone in the conservatory as the afternoon light faded. The recital was only 1 week away, and she still hadn't committed to participating. She had called the other families to let them know that the recital would proceed as planned, but she hadn't been able to bring herself to say that she would be performing. Rebecca arrived for their usual Thursday evening session, finding Catherine staring at a pile of sheet music on the piano. "How did things go with Sophia today?" Rebecca asked, settling into her usual chair. "She shared her compositions with me. Beautiful, heartbreaking pieces she wrote for her parents." Catherine picked up one of Sophia's notebooks, running her fingers over the colorful notation. She asked if I thought her parents could still hear music. "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know for sure, but that love finds ways to continue." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Do you believe that?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I want to. I want to believe that Charlotte somehow knows that I'm trying to find my way back to music. But, most days, it just feels like she's gone, and music is another thing that died with her. What if music isn't about connecting with Charlotte anymore? What if it's about connecting with the part of yourself that Charlotte helped you discover?" The suggestion made Catherine uncomfortable. She had always thought of her musical ability as something she had given to Charlotte, a gift passed from mother to daughter. The idea that Charlotte had given something back, something that belonged to Catherine alone, felt both foreign and frightening. "I don't know who I am without her," Catherine admitted. "Everything I loved about music was tied up in sharing it with her." "But, you've been sharing music with Sophia. How does that feel?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "Different. But, not wrong. When I play with Sophia, I'm not trying to replace what I had with Charlotte. I'm trying to honor it by helping another child find the same joy." "And, what about playing for yourself? When was the last time you played music just because you wanted to hear it?" Catherine couldn't remember. Even before Charlotte's death, her musical life had revolved around teaching and accompanying her daughter. She realized with a start that she might never have played music purely for her own joy. "I don't think I ever have," she said finally. "Maybe that's what this journey is really about. Maybe Sophia is teaching you something Charlotte couldn't." That evening, Catherine stayed late at the conservatory. She sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys, but, instead of playing something she had taught or something she was preparing to teach, she let her fingers find their own way across the keyboard. The melody that emerged was slow and mournful at first, full of the grief she had been carrying for months. But, gradually, other emotions crept in. Hope, tentative and fragile. Love, not just for Charlotte but, for Sophia, for the beauty of music itself, for the possibility of healing. And, underneath it all, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. As she played, Catherine felt Charlotte's presence not as an absence, but as a foundation. Everything Charlotte had taught her about wonder and creativity and fearless expression was still there, woven into the fabric of who Catherine was as a musician. Sophia was teaching her to access those gifts again, but they had been there all along. The melody evolved, becoming more complex, more hopeful. Catherine found herself smiling as she played, surprised by the music that was flowing from her fingers. This was her voice, shaped by motherhood and teaching and loss, but uniquely her own. When she finally stopped playing, the conservatory felt different. Not empty, but expectant, as if it were waiting to see what music would come next. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text message from Sophia. "Thank you for helping me remember that music is still beautiful. Can we play my Papa's song at the recital?" Catherine stared at the message for a long moment. Sophia was ready to share her music with others, to honor her parents by playing the song she had written for them. The girl's courage was inspiring and terrifying. Catherine typed back, "I would be honored to play with you." As soon as she sent the message, Catherine felt a shift in her understanding of the recital. It wasn't about getting back to where she had been before Charlotte's death. It was about stepping forward into something new, something that honored the past while embracing the possibility of healing. She called Rebecca, knowing her friend would still be awake despite the late hour. "I've decided about the recital," Catherine said when Rebecca answered. "Tell me." "Sophia and I are going to perform together. She wrote a song for her father, and she wants to share it. I'm terrified, but I think that's exactly why I need to do it." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that decision?" Catherine surprised herself with her answer. "Grateful. Grateful to Sophia for showing me that music can carry both grief and hope at the same time. Grateful to Charlotte for giving me a foundation of musical love that no amount of loss can take away. And grateful to myself for being brave enough to try again. After they hung up, Catherine walked through the conservatory one more time before leaving. She paused at Charlotte's favorite spot by the window, where her daughter used to stand and watch the birds in the garden while Catherine played. "I'm going to play again," Catherine said quietly to the empty room. "Not because I'm ready to let go of missing you, but because I think music might be one of the ways I can keep loving you." The silence that followed didn't feel like an absence anymore. It felt like a promise, a space waiting to be filled with new melodies and old memories, with Sophia's bright creativity and Catherine's hard-won wisdom. The recital was 1 week away, and, for the first time since Charlotte's death, Catherine was looking forward to making music. Not despite her grief, but because of what her grief had taught her about the power of love to transcend even the most devastating loss. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the dark sky, and, in Charlotte's garden, the roses continued to bloom, reaching toward the light even in the darkness. The morning of the recital dawned bright and clear, with golden sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the community center's main hall. Catherine arrived early, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the chairs and tested the microphone system. The stage held a beautiful grand piano, its black surface gleaming under the warm stage lights. Sophia had insisted on wearing her mother's favorite dress for the performance, a deep blue velvet that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. Maria had spent the morning braiding Sophia's hair with tiny white flowers, a tradition Sophia's mother had started for special occasions. When they arrived at the venue, Sophia looked like a young musician ready to honor her family's memory through music. The audience began filtering in around 2 o'clock. Catherine recognized many faces from her years of teaching, parents and grandparents who had supported the annual recital even after their own children had outgrown piano lessons. There were also new faces, families from Sophia's school and members of the Harmony of Hearts program who had come to support what they knew was an important milestone. Rebecca sat in the third row, offering Catherine an encouraging smile. Dr. Patricia Williams, the program director who had first suggested the partnership between Catherine and Sophia, sat nearby with a small group of other coordinators. They had been quietly observing the progress of this particular pairing, understanding that its success might provide a model for helping other bereaved families find their way back to healing activities. As the recital began, Catherine watched from the wings as young pianists took the stage one by one. 7-year-old Marcus played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with such concentration that he forgot to breathe between phrases. 10-year-old Sarah performed a simplified version of a Bach minuet with remarkable precision for someone who had only been studying for 8 months. Each performance was met with enthusiastic applause from the supportive audience. Catherine found herself remembering Charlotte's performance from the previous year. Her daughter had played Chopin's Minute Waltz with infectious joy, adding her own playful flourishes that had made Catherine laugh with delight. Charlotte had taken her bow with a huge grin, blowing kisses to Catherine before skipping off the stage. But, instead of the crushing sadness that such memories usually brought, Catherine felt a warm ache, a bittersweet appreciation for those moments of pure happiness. Sophia had taught her that remembering joy didn't diminish it or make it more painful. It honored it. When their turn came, Sophia walked onto the stage with remarkable composure. Catherine followed, settling beside her on the piano bench they had arranged to accommodate both performers. The hall grew quiet as the audience sensed something special was about to happen. "Good afternoon," Sophia said into the microphone, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Sophia Martinez. Today I'm going to play a song I wrote for my papa. He died 8 months ago in a fire with my mama, but I wanted to play his song today so everyone could know how much he loved music, even though he couldn't sing very well." A gentle ripple of laughter moved through the audience at Sophia's matter-of-fact honesty. Catherine saw several people dabbing at their eyes, moved by the girl's courage in sharing such personal loss. "Mrs. Catherine is going to help me play it," Sophia continued. "She understands about missing people you love, because her daughter Charlotte died too. But we learned together that music doesn't die even when people do." Catherine felt her breath catch at Sophia's simple but profound statement. The girl had articulated something Catherine had been struggling to understand for months. Sophia positioned her hands over the keys, and Catherine placed hers at the lower end of the keyboard. They had practiced this piece dozens of times over the past week, but performing it for an audience felt completely different. This wasn't just a piano recital anymore. It was a ceremony of remembrance, a celebration of love that transcended death. Sophia began with the playful melody she had written to capture her father's morning coffee ritual. The notes danced and bubbled like percolating coffee, punctuated by musical representations of grinding beans and whistling kettles. Catherine's accompaniment provided a warm, steady foundation that suggested the comfort and routine of a loving home. As the piece progressed, Sophia added variations she had developed during their practice sessions. Sometimes the melody became more elaborate, reflecting her growing confidence. Other times it simplified, becoming almost childlike in its sweetness. Catherine followed Sophia's lead, adjusting her accompaniment to support whatever musical choices the girl made. Halfway through the piece, Sophia began to sing softly, adding wordless vocals that her mother had taught her. Her voice was pure and clear, floating above the piano melody like a prayer. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief alone. They were tears of amazement at this child's resilience, at the beauty of music's power to heal and connect and celebrate. The audience was completely silent, riveted by the raw emotion and unexpected sophistication of the performance. Parents who had come expecting a typical children's recital found themselves witnessing something much more profound. This was music as therapy, as memorial service, as declaration of hope. As the song reached its conclusion, Sophia's melody became slower and more contemplative. Catherine could hear in it the child's processing of loss, her growing understanding that missing someone could coexist with celebrating their memory. The final notes hung in the air for a long moment before fading into absolute silence. Then, the applause began. It started with one person, then spread throughout the hall until it became a standing ovation. But this wasn't the polite enthusiasm typically given to children's performances. This was something deeper, an acknowledgement of courage and artistry that had moved everyone present. Sophia stood and took a small bow, then turned to Catherine. "Thank you for helping me play for Papa again." Catherine hugged Sophia tightly, whispering, "Thank you for helping me remember that music is still beautiful." As they left the stage together, Catherine felt a profound sense of completion. Not the kind that meant an ending, but the kind that suggested a new beginning. She had performed publicly for the first time since Charlotte's death, and instead of betraying her daughter's memory, it had felt like keeping it alive in a new way. In the reception area after the recital, Catherine was approached by parents, friends, and strangers who wanted to share how moved they had been by the performance. Many spoke about their own experiences with loss, with finding ways to honor loved ones while continuing to live fully. Maria approached with tears streaming down her face. "That was beautiful," she said, embracing both Catherine and Sophia. I know Sophia's parents were listening. Dr. Williams joined their group, her professional composure barely concealing her emotional response to what she had witnessed. "That was extraordinary," she said. "You've shown us something important about how music can be part of the healing process." As the afternoon wound down and families began to leave, Catherine found herself alone with Sophia for a few moments. The girl was carefully placing her mother's notebook of compositions back in its protective case. "Will we keep playing together?" Sophia asked. Catherine smiled, realizing that the question no longer filled her with anxiety. "If you'd like to. I think we make good musical partners. I want to write a song for my mama next. And maybe someday, I could write one for Charlotte, even though I never met her. Do you think she would like that?" Catherine felt her heart swell with emotion. "I think she would love that very much." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave the community center, Catherine caught sight of her reflection in one of the hallway mirrors. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had sat in silent grief just weeks before. There was still sadness in her eyes, still the marks of profound loss. But there was also something new: purpose, connection, and the quiet confidence that comes from helping another person heal. The drive home took Catherine past Charlotte's school, past the corner where the accident had happened, past all the familiar landmarks of their life together. But, instead of the usual crushing weight of memory, Catherine felt Charlotte's presence as a gift that continued to give. Every lesson Catherine had learned about wonderland, creativity and fearless musical expression had been preparation for this moment, for the opportunity to help Sophia find her own voice while rediscovering her own. That evening, Catherine sat at her piano as she had every night for the past week, but, instead of struggling to find music through her grief, she let her grief inform her music. She played a melody that held both sadness and hope, both memory and possibility. It was a song for Charlotte, for Sophia, for every parent who had lost a child and every child who had lost a parent. But, most importantly, it was a song for herself, an acknowledgement that healing didn't mean forgetting, and that love could continue to grow even in the soil of loss. As the last notes faded in the quiet conservatory, Catherine felt something settle into place inside her chest. It wasn't the absence of grief, but the presence of something larger than grief. It was the understanding that music, like love, was bigger than any single relationship, even one as profound as the bond between mother and daughter. The recital had shown her that Catherine Miller was still a musician, still a teacher, still someone who could create beauty in the world. Charlotte's death had not ended that identity. It had transformed it, deepened it, given it new meaning and purpose. In the weeks that followed, Catherine would continue working with Sophia, watching the girl bloom back into the confident young musician she had been before tragedy struck. Other families would join the Harmony of Hearts program, drawn by word of the transformation they had witnessed at the recital. Catherine would begin teaching again, working specifically with children who had experienced loss, helping them find their way back to activities that had once brought them joy. But, on this night, in the quiet of the conservatory where she and Charlotte had shared so many happy hours, Catherine simply sat in gratitude for the unexpected gift Sophia had given her. The girl had shown her that healing wasn't about getting back to who you were before loss. It was about becoming who you were meant to be after, integrating grief and hope into something new and beautiful and true. Outside, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. In Charlotte's garden, the roses had finished blooming for the season, but their roots remained strong, preparing for new growth in the spring. And, in the conservatory, the piano waited patiently for the music that would come tomorrow, and the day after that, and for all the days to come when love and memory and hope would once again find their voice through the magic of music.